Hi, everyone, and welcome to Easy English Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Sarah. We're excited to have you join us for today's episode.
Today, we're diving into something that every English learner needs to master, the past simple tense.
That's right. Whether you're talking about what you did last weekend or describing historical events, the past simple tense is absolutely essential for everyday English conversation.
In the next few minutes, we'll walk you through everything you need to know about this important tense. We'll cover regular and irregular verbs, share some practical examples, and even discuss common mistakes to avoid.
Plus, we'll practice together with some real-life conversations that you can use in your daily life.
So get ready to improve your English grammar in a fun and easy way.
Let's start with the basics. What exactly is the past simple tense?
Well, it's pretty straightforward, actually. We use the past simple tense to talk about actions or situations that happened and finished in the past.
Right, like when I say I walked to work yesterday or she studied English last year.
Exactly. And one of the best things about past simple is that for most regular verbs, you just need to add ed to the base form of the verb.
Oh, that's a good point. So walk becomes walked, talk becomes talked, and play becomes played.
And don't forget about the pronunciation of these ed endings. Sometimes it can be tricky for English learners.
That's true. Take the word watched, for example. It's pronounced as watched. Or played, where the ed sounds like d.
Speaking of regular verbs, should we give our listeners some more examples they can practice with?
Great idea. Here's a simple sentence. Last weekend, I cleaned my apartment, cooked dinner, and watched a movie.
Perfect example. Notice how all those verbs, cleaned, cooked, and watched, follow the same pattern of adding ed.
And remember, we often use time expressions with past simple, like yesterday, last week, 2 days ago, or in 2020.
That's right. These time expressions help make it clear that we're talking about finished actions in the past. Now that we understand regular verbs, let's tackle something a bit more challenging. Irregular verbs in the past simple.
Ah, yes, these are the tricky ones that don't follow the regular ed pattern, right?
Exactly. Take the verb go, for example. Instead of saying goed, we say went.
And eat becomes ate, not eated. These are the verbs that often confuse English learners because each one is unique.
Let's share some common irregular verbs. For instance, buy becomes bought, teach becomes taught, and bring becomes brought.
I notice those three have a similar sound pattern with ought. That's helpful for remembering them together.
Good observation. Though be careful, because not all irregular verbs follow patterns. Take see, which becomes saw, or do, which becomes did.
Speaking of pronunciation, some irregular verbs can be quite tricky to say correctly. Like thought. Remember to stick your tongue out slightly for that th sound.
Another challenging one is caught. The ought sound can be difficult for many English learners.
What I find helpful is grouping irregular verbs by their patterns. Like drink, drank, sing, sang, swim, swam.
That's a great tip. And don't forget verb.
Oh yes, I hear that one all the time. Another common error is using the past continuous when they should use past simple. Like saying, I was played tennis yesterday, instead of I played tennis yesterday.
Speaking of irregular verbs, I notice many learners struggle with verbs that don't change in the past tense, like cut or put.
Exactly. They might say, I cutted the paper, when it should just be, I cut the paper. Time expressions can be tricky too.
Yes, like when people use the present perfect instead of past simple. They might say, I have visited Paris last year when it should be, I visited Paris last year.
Let's give our listeners some tips to avoid these mistakes. First, always remember that past simple is for completed actions in the past.
And if you're using time expressions like yesterday, last week, or 2 days ago, that's usually a clear signal to use past simple.
Another helpful tip is to make a list of common irregular verbs and practice them regularly. Focus on the ones you use most often in your daily conversations.
And don't forget about questions and negatives. Remember to use did and didn't instead of changing the main verb. Not, went you to the store, but did you go to the store?
That's a great reminder. The main verb always stays in its base form when using did or didn't.
Hey, let's try something fun. Why don't we have a conversation about what we did last weekend?
That's a great idea. We can show our listeners how to use past simple naturally. I'll start. I went to a fantastic restaurant on Saturday. I ordered a delicious pasta dish, and I tried some amazing local wine. The waiter recommended it, and he was right.
Oh, really? What kind of food did you eat there? That sounds wonderful. I had a pretty active weekend myself. I played tennis with my brother and then we watched an old movie at home.
Did you win the tennis match?
Actually, no. He beat me quite badly, but we had a lot of fun anyway.
Let's pause here and analyze what we just did. Did you notice how we used past simple throughout our conversation?
Yes. We used regular verbs like ordered and played, and irregular verbs like went and had.
And when I asked questions, I used did, like when I said, "Did you win?" instead of changing the main verb.
Exactly. Notice how natural it feels when you're just talking about things that happened in the past. We didn't have to think too hard about the grammar.
That's the key. Practice makes perfect. The more you use past simple in natural conversations like this, the more automatic it becomes.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today in our discussion about the past simple tense.
We certainly have. Let's quickly recap what we learned for our listeners.
We started by explaining that past simple is used for completed actions in the past, and we looked at how regular verbs end in -ed.
And don't forget those tricky irregular verbs like went, had, and spoke. They're just something you need to memorize with practice.
The key thing to remember is that past simple is actually quite simple to use once you get the hang of it. You just need to remember that one form for the past.
Thank you all for joining us today on Easy English Podcast. Keep practicing your past simple tense, and we'll see you in our next episode.
Goodbye, everyone, and remember, yesterday you learned something new and today you're already better at English.